All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining us this afternoon. Just a couple of quick housekeeping things before we get started. If you do have any questions, there's a chat window in the GoToWebinar screen. You can go ahead and put your questions in there, and our presenters, Kevin and Kieran, will take them at the end. We do have about 15 minutes at the end for answering those questions. And also, we will send out a recording and the slide deck after the presentation for your reference. So take it away, Kevin.
Great. Thanks, everybody, for joining today. I appreciate it. Quick introductions. My name is Kevin Hooten, and I run the software asset management practice, the delivery practice for SoftwareONE. I've been doing it for a couple years now, and previous to that, I'd been in a kind of a career consultant in IT strategy and so forth. So kind of fell into the ITAM space many years ago and have gravitated to it due to its complexity, and felt the urge to try and make it simpler, and that's really what we're here to talk about today is SAMSimple. So Kieran, you want to say hello?
Will do. Thank you, Kevin. So hi guys, I'm Kieran Dean. I'm joining you from London today, so it's a little bit later in my day, but very nice to be talking to you. So I'm SoftwareONE's Flexera practice lead. I joined SoftwareONE earlier this year, and since joining, my sole focus really has been on SAMSimple and bringing it to market. So I'm the global solution owner for SAMSimple. Prior to joining SoftwareONE, I've spent my whole professional career in software asset management, so all 17 years of it, and I've had various roles, as you can see from the slide. But prior to joining SoftwareONE, I actually joined from Flexera, and before that, I've worked at the likes of Unified Logic, Peregrine Systems, HP, and EDS. So I've always been in the IT and specifically software asset management space. So the format for today is we're going to obviously talk about SAMSimple. So I'm going to hand back to Kevin, who's going to give you a brief overview of the background to SAMSimple. Why is SoftwareONE coming to market with SAMSimple? So he's going to talk about the why of SAMSimple, and then he's going to hand back to me, and I'm going to talk about the what of SAMSimple. So what SAMSimple is, how it works, how it's configured, and what benefits ultimately it provides to our customers. So without that, I'm going to hand back to Kevin to take on the why of SAMSimple.
Great. Let me first start by making sure folks are familiar with SoftwareONE. Good place to start. So believe it or not, SoftwareONE is the largest consultancy in the SAM space today. We have built over the last decade a practice of around 400 dedicated professionals that focus really day in and day out on software asset management and the management of software asset management. So we've got a fairly large geographic footprint. We have what I call butts in seats in about 80 different countries, lots of different certifications, and our practice has really at least in North America, has done some really good things for a lot of different customers, and our business is booming right now. We complete about 5,000 projects, SAM projects, every year, and while that sounds like a very high number, some of our projects are very short-term in nature, where we would go into a customer's environment, deploy a tool, assess maybe a specific publisher, and then go away. Some of these are more long-term in nature, where we provide a managed service. We do have about 500 or so customers that are operating with us in a managed service on a basically a daily or an annual basis. We've built a very nice advisory services practice that focuses in a number of areas. Some of the more complex publishers, the Oracles, the IBMs, SAP, and Microsofts. And we've been well recognized for having one of the largest teams and probably the most sophisticated. We were given the kind of the #1 ranking in terms of expertise from ITAM Review back in 2015. So just a few accolades. Fairly large practice with a fairly good understanding of the variety of tools that are out there. We have some, customers everywhere from, small mid-market customers all the way up to some of the Fortune 100s. And we know the Flexera tool set very, very well. We were recently given kind of the accolade of being their fastest growing partner in both the UK and the US. Okay. So now let's jump to kind of the why of SAMSimple. Okay. So let's level set first and talk about, first of all, let's make sure everybody understands what is software asset management. I think most folks probably on the call do, but let's just start here. So SoftwareONE, we're not just about a tool. Software asset management is the people, process, and technology that makes up the effective management, control, and protection of software assets through all stages of the life cycle. So you can, on the right-hand side, you can kind of see the traditional life cycle for an asset. It goes from portfolio management all the way through to the end to retirement. And it's all about managing each of those aspects along the journey of an asset and making sure that you know, what you're using is what's called for. So providing visibility and transparency into the software estate to be able to effectively control costs and provide financial planning throughout the organization. You want to be able to reduce your security threats by understanding what exactly is on your servers, desktops, your mobile devices, etc. You want to be able to eliminate over-licensed software and unused applications, and this is probably the #1 driver of ROI from a SAM program. To be able to reharvest, reallocate, and understand what assets are retiring and what software sits on those machines, and then to be able to provide audit protection and defense against you know, aggressive publishers. Okay, that's kind of the definition of software asset management. So we'll start there, and we'll kind of go into my emoji wall. So now I have young kids. They went to go see a movie, and so I was inspired. They went to see this emoji movie. I was inspired because I presented last week at the Gartner conference in Nashville, and so I created this slide kind of in tribute to my daughters. But I want to touch briefly on kind of what's working and what's not across software asset management, and then this will kind of drive us into this conversation around why SAMSimple. So just real quick, what's working and what's not, you know, C-suite attention. What I mean by that is folks that are thinking about SAM, and they come at it from a strategic nature, are seeing 3 times the success rate that non-strategic SAM programs are. So strategic being defined as those programs that are either aligned or run by a CIO or CEO. Non-strategic being those programs that are treated as just reactive in nature. Perhaps they're being run by the vendor management organization or procurement group, but there's not really a tie-in to a strategic aspect of the business and why SAM is really important. And so when you do come at it from a strategic standpoint, again, it's 3 times more successful, and that was proven out by a study recently by Gartner. The second one, which I really like my emoji down at the bottom, discovery is working very, very well. Tools have been in the environment for a long time. That part of the puzzle seems to have been relatively solved for. But what is not working very well is there's still a myriad of data that needs to occur and be aggregated in order to do SAM correctly. So whether, you know, you've got all this discovery information, you've got Active Directory information, then you have to cross-reference that with certain business data, whether it be cost centers or locations. All of that just breeds complexity. And so that part of the puzzle has not really gotten any easier. And so that's one of the aspects to doing SAM correctly that people often kind of overlook. And so it's critically important that you go in eyes wide open. It's a tough problem to solve for, and you're going to need people, not just necessarily a tool to solve for it. Audit gain share. I'll talk about the bottom one, which is entitlement management. Again, another kind of data element. oftentimes overlooked by people. This is probably the second largest element of failure for customers today, is not being able to effectively load entitlements, work through establishing baselines. What was the original transaction that established this licensing position, and what were the subsequent perhaps upgrades or maintenance orders placed, and tracking that history all the way through. That part of the equation really hasn't been solved for in an automated format. SAM ROI is producing sizable results for customers. When you look at some of the statistics in the market, 36% of software is reportedly sitting on a shelf and not being effectively utilized. And so just in that fact alone, you could build a very solid business case for investing in a SAM program. And then lastly, DIY negotiations. We see far too many customers that are suboptimally working on perhaps audits or renewals, and when we take kind of a look back at what they were able to achieve, oftentimes bringing in outside third parties who really understand the dynamics of certain publishers can really add a lot of value. But the more important one, the last one I want to talk about, Kieran, is this one here. It's called SAM maturation, and this is important because this is the whole reason for SAMSimple, which is that 86% of companies today would score what we score as a C or a D on a report card. That's what they would get for their SAM maturity, meaning that a lot of companies today, so 9 out of 10, are largely working with perhaps just 1 or 2 discovery tools and still working in spreadsheets. They don't have policies or processes well defined. Their governance hasn't really been established. They don't have stakeholder buy-ins and so forth. And so all of that equates to doing SAM today and probably spending far too much on your software estate. And so that's kind of the reason for SAMSimple. It's approaching those 9 out of 10 companies with an offering that I think in today's marketplace really can't be matched. So now let's continue down this path. So when you think about SAM maturity, again, I presented this at Gartner, the Gartner conference last week. You have to ask yourself, what team are you on, right? So when we talk about maturity, there's generally four categories. Given that it's NFL and kickoff for football in the last few weeks, I wanted to present this back to people in something that they would understand. And so when I talk about being, at the basic level of SAM, for those that know football, you can equate that to being the Cleveland Browns. So I apologize for anybody who's on the phone from Ohio, but not a very successful program over the last decade or so. And so if you're in the basic category, think of yourselves as being the Cleveland Browns. Now you're not alone. 59% of all companies would roughly fall into that same category. So really 6 out of 10 would be Cleveland Browns. Moving up that curve, you're getting a little bit better, but you're still categorized probably as the New York Jets. Again, apologizing to anyone from New York, but I'm a Giants fan, so not too sorry. 27% of companies would fall in that category. And then as you begin to move up, you see Green Bay Packers, New England Patriots, 13%, 1%, respectively. There's not a lot of companies that are doing software asset management well. And when we define well as being in that dynamic state where you're able to really pull on-demand compliance reports that are accurate. And so probably the more interesting thing I think on this slide is what we found through research is it takes 18 to 24 months left on your one of these categories. So about it. If you're at Cleveland Browns today and you want to become either the Green Bay Packers or New England Patriots, that journey can be upwards of around 8 years, right? So that's a long time to go at this program, and I'm not sure you're going to get a lot of buy-in from CEOs and CIOs when you explain to them that it's going to take 8 years to get to that level of maturity. Okay. I'm going to go to the next slide, Kieran. and we'll talk about some of the barriers and excuses, and then we'll get into the what behind SAMSimple. So I think I touched on some of these things, but collecting accurate deployment data across a diverse hardware, operating systems, virtual environments, and cloud services, that in and of itself is a fairly complex problem to solve for. Software licensing agreements have very complex terms and conditions. Oftentimes there's a lot of gray areas, and you need licensing experts who can come in and help you really understand what your use rights are, what your upgrade rights are, your downgrade rights, what are your mobility rights, etc. Contracts and entitlements are often not well managed across distributed organizations. Audit activities are very, very time-consuming for organizations to deal with. Especially if you don't have available data or good, clean data to deal with. Sometimes it's almost impossible. You don't know whether you're responding to an audit with a set of facts that are accurate, and you really don't. Without having a solid SAM program, you're really left perhaps with a lot of risk. And I've seen a lot of companies pay a lot more than they should. In a recent study that I did, we were able to take what we call a baseline and reduce it by, on average, 76%. So what that means is if an auditor approached you and said, you're out of compliance, you owe us $1, SoftwareONE has been able to successfully help companies whittle that number down to 24 cents. And the last point, reconciliation of inventory and usage data versus license entitlements and contracts. All of this goes to create kind of the problems that we're going to try and address on the next set of slides, which is the what of SAMSimple. So take it away, Kieran.
Thanks, Kevin. Yeah, I think that was a great bit of background, and the idea here, guys, is not to kind of bum everybody out with kind of the state of the nation or the state of maturity that we're seeing in the marketplace, but I'm afraid these are realities that many organizations find themselves in today. And what's interesting for me is when we look at that level of SAM maturation historically, we were seeing the same kind of numbers 10 years ago in terms of the percentages of organizations that were finding themselves in these, as Kevin put it, scoring C's and D's on the report card. Because it's very difficult to progress along that path to SAM maturity, up to 8 years, as Kevin mentioned. And one last thing, just to add to what Kevin said on the barriers or excuses, affecting SAM maturity, why aren't people progressing along that curve? The other reason is, of course, the lack of skilled resources that are in the marketplace. So, Gartner's saying by 2018, there's going to be such a skills shortage in the marketplace that up to half of companies out there, 50% of companies out there, are going to be reliant on third parties or managed services to help plug that skills gap. So yeah, these are realities, and really this is why SoftwareONE wanted to launch something that would tackle a lot of these problems, and specifically launch a solution that was going to help customers in that mid-market space, that kind of small to mid-market space. So we're talking about organizations who are up to about 5,000 or so devices in size, who typically don't have the budgets in place for expensive enterprise class SAM tooling to go and overcome the barrier of collecting accurate deployment data across the multitude of operating systems and virtual environments that Kevin just mentioned. So what we wanted to do was develop a solution that would get those customers up and running very quickly with a SAM practice, and that is the idea behind SAMSimple. So we're going to talk about, we're going to define that a little bit further for you now, talking about what is SAMSimple. So as the name implies, it's very simple. It is the world's first global SAM managed service that offers a pay-as-you-grow model. So what do I mean by that? What I mean is SAMSimple is offered in a SaaS capacity. So in terms of payments, you as a customer will only pay for what you're using. So the pricing for SAMSimple is based on the number of devices that we're managing using the solution. Simple as that. And as that number increases, you'll pay more because it's on a per device basis. If that number decreases, you'll pay less. And the billing is quarterly for SAMSimple. So it's a very straightforward model. But what SAMSimple gives you as a customer is industry-leading technology combined with industry-leading managed services from SoftwareONE. So as you can probably guess, my title is I'm the Flexera practice lead at SoftwareONE. So that industry-leading technology that I'm talking about is provided by Flexera software. Okay, so the combination of technology and industry best practice expertise from SoftwareONE, really what we're saying is we're going to help you overcome those barriers, overcome those excuses which are impeding your progression along that maturity curve towards effective software asset management. So there are no more excuses. So a little bit more detail now on how SAMSimple is comprised. So it's a very straightforward 3 + 3 + 3 model. So I'll define what those are. The first 3 is the term of the engagement. So SAMSimple is a 3-year managed service, and as I mentioned, that's paid for on a pay-as-you-grow model. So based on the number of devices that are in your organization. The second 3 is the number of publishers. So there are 3 publishers in scope for SAMSimple. Now the reason behind that is based on the fact that many software asset management practices fail because customers try to boil the ocean. They try to onboard every publisher into their SAM practice, in the first year. And frankly, that's very, very difficult to do. And also, it's a false economy. For most customers, 80% of your software spend is comprised of the top 20% of your software portfolio. So what we're saying to customers is pick the 3 publishers that represent the most pain, the most spend, and the most risk to you, and we will take care of them for you. SoftwareONE will take care of them from a compliance and optimization perspective, but we will also enable you on the technology that we will deploy, we will support, we will host, and we will provide you operational training for so that you can tackle the rest. And the rest, of course, represents that 20% of your spend and the more simpler publishers that are in your portfolio. So that's the concept behind it. And then there's the final point is the time to value. So we don't want customers going on a year-long onboarding process. What we wanted to do with SAMSimple is develop something that would get customers up and running really quickly. So we've developed a very accelerated onboarding program that's really based on 3 stages. We plan, we build, and then we run. And you'll see a little bit more detail on that. But it's really the combination of this market-leading sophistication from a technology and service perspective, the ongoing support and optimization of environment that's going to provide the quickest route to maturity. And we're saying to customers that on your own, as Kevin mentioned, it'll take you perhaps 8 years, to achieve that optimum dynamic state of SAM maturity. With SoftwareONE and SAMSimple, we'll get you there 3 to 4 times faster. So let's go into a little bit more detail now on the architecture. So as I've already mentioned, SAMSimple is underpinned by Flexera's technology. So specifically, that is FlexNet Managed Suite, which is Flexera's software license optimization capability. And this is industry-leading technology. So it's a hybrid model in the sense that we have the back-end components, the back-end infrastructure, the application server, the database server. SoftwareONE are hosting that in the public cloud. So we're hosting that in the public cloud on Azure. Now, in order to gather all of that inventory information from the customer's environment, be that inventory information from endpoints, plugging into third-party sources of information like SCCM, other inventory sources, plugging into sources like Active Directory to get user and device information, connecting to hypervisor technologies such as VMware to map the relationships between physical hosts and virtual machines, plugging into cloud services like Office 365 to pull down consumption information. So pulling all that information, all of that's gathered by what Flexera call their beacons. So the beacon server really orchestrates the gathering of that information. So part of onboarding customers is deploying that technology into their environment so that it can gather all of that information. And when the beacon server or servers gather that information, what they'll do is then encrypt it so that it can be securely sent up to the SAMSimple cloud where it's processed and analyzed and obviously made available for reporting. And the customers themselves have full unrestricted access to SAMSimple, powered by FNMS, so that they can see this information for themselves. They can see their compliance positions for not just the in-scope 3 publishers, of course, but for everything that's in their environment. So that's the logical architecture for SAMSimple. So now I'm going to go into a little bit more detail on the methodology to get customers up and running. So as I mentioned, it's this 3-stage process of plan, build, and run. And the plan and build stages represent the onboarding phase for customers. And we're targeting a 1 to 2 month window to get customers up and running and executed on that plan and build stage. So the plan stage is where we work with the customer, we sit down, we run workshops, planning and design workshops, and the outcome from that stage is a system design for standing the technology up and also gathering the entitlement information required for the service. So once the planning stage is done, we then execute on that in the build stage. And really 3 things happen in parallel during the build stage. One is we deploy the SAM tooling, so we deploy Flexera's FNMS into the customer's environment. Those beacon servers that we saw from the previous slide, the agent and agentless based inventory capabilities connecting to those third-party sources within the customer's environment so that we can gather all the information we need. In parallel to that, we also do the entitlement gathering. So as I mentioned, the customer picks 3 publishers that represent the most pain, spend, and effort, and we will gather entitlement information for those 3 publishers. And we have a very proven methodology for accurately quickly gathering that information and establishing accurate baselines for those publishers. And then the 3rd stream, which happens in parallel during the build stage, is the organization data gathering. So this is gathering information about the customer's organization. So things like, departments, business units, locations, cost centers. We gather that information so that we can load it into the toolset so that the customers can contextualize the information according to their environment. So, even though compliance might be measured, across the whole organization, customers might want to slice and dice that data to be able to report on it against different business units, against different locations, to support showback or chargeback activities, for example. So those 3 streams happen in parallel during the build phase. And the plan and build phase, as I mentioned, represent the onboarding stage, which we're targeting a 1 to 2 month window to get customers up and running. So when the onboarding's finished, what we'll then do is transition customers into the BAU phase, which stands for business as usual. And this then means the customer will start to receive the regular cadence of deliverables and outcomes that the managed service is designed to provide. So what this is the license compliance and recommendations reports for the in-scope publishers. And as I've mentioned, we also provide the SAM hosting for the SAM tooling, so hosting for FNMS. We provide support, and we also provide operational training in the format of an e-learning library that will enable the customer to use the technology for themselves within their environment. And then finally, we have audit support built into SAMSimple, so that's available. What that means is, should the customer find themselves being audited by any of the in-scope publishers while SAMSimple is active, it means the audit support service will kick in that will help the customer strategically plan how to respond to that audit, and then on the back end also provide validation of the audit findings. So to really set customers up for the most optimum outcome from that audit. So that's a little bit of detail on the methodology to get customers up and running and realizing benefits from the SAMSimple managed service. So now we're going to look at the benefits of doing that, and actually we can map these benefits back to the barriers that Kevin just described on the previous slide. So this slide is about how SAMSimple overcomes those barriers. So when it comes to addressing or overcoming the barrier of the difficulty of gathering inventory information across the entire organization, well, we overcome that simply by using industry-leading technology that underpins SAMSimple. So Flexera's FNMS has both agent-based and agentless inventory across all major platforms, across Windows, Unix, Linux, Mac, across all virtualization technologies, so be that server virtualization, desktop virtualization, application virtualization. You know, Flexera can natively talk to VMware, Hyper-V, Citrix XenApp, XenDesktop, Microsoft AppV, and so on. So that the complexity layer provided by those virtualization technologies can be overcome. And it can also plug into cloud services like Office 365, for example, so that the consumption information can be pulled down from those technologies. It also has out-of-the-box connectivity with third-party inventory tools. So if these customers are using technologies like SCCM to deploy software, to pack software, and of course, Flexera can plug into those technologies to leverage that information in addition to its own native inventory capabilities. On the second obstacle, when it comes to addressing the complexity of software license contracts and product use rights, well, we address that with SoftwareONE's, unparalleled in-house expertise around software licenses. So when Kevin started this presentation, he was talking about the breadth and depth of expertise that we have globally across, multiple software publishers, hundreds of software publishers. We've taken that information, we've taken the years of successfully delivering managed services to customers, and we've baked it into the delivery teams for SAMSimple. That's how we overcome that complexity. When it comes to gathering accurate entitlement, as I've already mentioned, during the build phase for SAMSimple, we will go and gather that information from the publishers, from resellers, from the customers' own historical records of their contracts and purchases. We'll provide the best and quickest and most accurate route to gathering that information so that we can accurately establish baselines for those publishers. When it comes to addressing the obstacle or the pain of audits and the impact that they have on time and resources, well, SAMSimple has our audit support capability. So that will kick in if the customer finds themselves being audited, and that will help the customer go through that process and minimize the impact on both the outcome of the audit, but also the impact it has on the resources within the organization. When it comes to the barrier of being able to reconcile the deployment information, the inventory information, against the entitlement information due to the complex license metrics that exist, well, again, SoftwareONE's highly experienced SAM teams know how to do those reconciliations, and furthermore can also identify opportunities for cost optimization for those technologies and publishers. And then finally, addressing the obstacle or the barrier of the lack of skilled resources that are in the marketplace, well, SoftwareONE will become effectively a virtual extension of our customers' SAM teams. So they will do the heavy lifting for those high-spend, high-paying, high-risk publishers and provide technology and support for everything else, and that will free up the time for your resources so that they can focus on what they should be focusing on, which are the business-driven priorities that you need your IT departments and SAM teams to be focusing on. So yeah, that's really an overview of how SAMSimple is overcoming those SAM barriers and really alleviating those excuses that are prohibitive towards effective SAM. So on to the next slide, and this is really to give a little bit more detail, a bit of a double click on the BAU, the business as usual deliverables that we are providing for customers. So I've already talked about the license compliance reports and recommendations reports. So these will provide the customer not only with a position of where they are for their in-scope publishers, but also what recommendations we would make, what is the actionable intelligence that customers can leverage to optimize their spend with those publishers. And those reports are delivered on a semi-annual basis. So basically twice a year, every 6 months is what I mean by semi-annual. And of course, we schedule the delivery of those reports to coincide with the publisher activities. So let's take an example. If Microsoft were one of the in-scope publishers, then we would synchronize the delivery of those reports to coincide with true-up or renewal activities for an EA, for example. So let's say we have a customer whose EA renewal is coming up at the end of June, then we'd want to deliver those reports to that customer perhaps in the March timeframe so that they can execute on the recommendations and also plan for those true-up activities. So when it comes to the hosting of Flexera's FNMS, FlexNet Manager Suite, the hosting, the support, and the operational training are provided on an ongoing basis. So the customer has full unrestricted access to the technology. We will support them if there are problems. Support tickets can be raised, of course, on an ongoing basis, and access to that e-learning library, the tutorials that enable the customer on the technology, available on an ongoing basis. Obviously, during the onboarding phase, as I already mentioned, those 3 activities where we deploy the technology to gather the inventory, we gather the entitlement information, and we gather the organizational information. So we do that during onboarding, but we don't just stop there. Of course, we need the system, we need the process to be continually replenished as this information changes. So for inventory data, we define schedules. Maybe scanning happens on a weekly basis or a bi-weekly basis. Obviously, as new entitlement purchases are made, we'll bring that information in so that the entitlement baseline is up to date. And of course, as the organization changes, as new divisions are created, as new cost centers are created and so on, we'll of course keep that information up to date as well on an ongoing basis so that it's always accurate. In terms of governance for SAMSimple, so we'll conduct quarterly service reviews with customers. So what that means is once a quarter, the SoftwareONE team for that customer will get together with the customer to make sure the service is performing exactly as it should be. So this is an opportunity to discuss the recommendations reports. Are those actions actually being executed? Are they being actions, those recommendations? Are there any support tickets that need to be discussed during the service review? And any other topics that the customer might want to bring up around any aspect of SAMSimple. They'll get the capability to do that on a quarterly basis. And then of course there's audit support, as I mentioned. So if the customer finds themselves being audited at any point during the SAMSimple agreement by any of the in-scope publishers, then that audit support service will kick in to ensure the most optimum outcome for that customer. So that's a bit of a double click on the service features that are provided with SAMSimple. So what I'd like to do now is do a quick summary of everything we've said, just to, I'm a great believer in the concept of a picture, says 1,000 words. So I've got a short animation here that will hopefully bring it all together and just illustrate what we've talked about. So as I mentioned, SAMSimple is where the customer chooses 3 publishers that represent the most pain, the most spend, and the most risk to them. So we've compiled the list of the 16 available publishers for SAMSimple based on thorough analysis of the spending patterns of customers up to about 5,000 seats that we know about. So of course, we're very confident that the list you see in front of you now, this software will be in use with customers who fall into that size bracket. And in fact, we're expecting customers to obviously have more than 3 of those publishers. But the idea is the customer chooses the 3 that represent the most pain, and they become the focal point for the SAMSimple solution. So in this example, I've got Microsoft, VMware, and Adobe. Okay, so let's say our customer says, these are the 3 I want you guys to just take the pain away for me for these publishers. So we'll do that. So we start the process of onboarding the customer. And as I mentioned, that was a 1 to 2 month time frame. So this is where we conduct those planning and design workshops. And also when we then stand the technology up, so create the customer tenant in our hosted environment, and also deploy that technology in the customer's infrastructure so that we can start gathering that inventory. In parallel to that, we collect the entitlement information, as I mentioned, for the in-scope publishers. So this would be gathering all of the entitlement information, normalizing that information, in this case for Microsoft, VMware, and Adobe, and loading that information into FlexNet Managed Suite, into the SAMSimple solution. And also in parallel is the organization data, the business units, the divisions, the cost centers, and so on that make that customer up, loading that information into the technology as well. After onboarding comes the transition to business as usual, and this is when the customer starts to receive those reports on that semi-annual basis aligned to their publisher activities. So the license compliance reports, the recommendations reports, and of course the customer, as I've mentioned, has access to the technology. They have support and they have operational training. They also have the audit support available to them. Now, one thing I absolutely want to stress is, whilst the focal point in terms of SoftwareONE doing the heavy lifting is on the 3 high-value, high-spend, high-paying publishers, Flexera's technology goes well beyond just 3 publishers, of course. So Flexera have an application recognition library of over 18,000 publishers and 210,000 applications. And Flexera are continuously adding titles to the application recognition library on a weekly basis. Their SKU library contains over 1.2 million SKUs. So on the entitlement side of things, again, they're continuously adding to that SKU library. So whilst SoftwareONE will do the heavy lifting for the 3 publishers that are the scope for the solution, the customer has full access, support, and training to tackle everything else that's in their environment, given the extremely deep and broad capabilities around software and hardware asset management that Flexera have. So that's that's a quick overview of SAMSimple in terms of that animation. And I think that takes us to almost quarter to the hour. So I'd like to thank you very much for your time and attention. What we're now going to do is I'll turn back to Danielle, who's going to basically take us through some of the questions that you guys have been typing away in the chat windows as we've been going.
Sure. So the first one I see here is back to the beacon that you were discussing earlier. Is the beacon an appliance or a VM?
So that's a great question. Thank you. The appliance is sorry, the beacon, I beg your pardon, is not an appliance. It's a piece of software. So what most customers do is deploy that onto a virtual server within their environment. You can, of course, deploy it onto a physical server. Most customers will deploy or install the beacon software onto a virtual server that's sitting in their environment. And of course, the way that we actually do that deployment is it's SoftwareONE that will do the implementation. So the customer would basically provision a virtual server. We obviously provide what the spec of that server is, and then SoftwareONE would deploy and configure that beacon server in the customer's environment, in addition to the agents and the integration into the third-party systems.
Great. Another
that
question
answers
here.
that question.
Another question here. Does Microsoft license include SQL Server and Windows Server?
It does indeed, yeah. So when we say you pick 3 publishers, that will cover all of the products for that publisher. So if a customer were to choose Microsoft, then of course that would include all Microsoft Server products, including SQL Server, Windows Server, as well as all Microsoft desktop products.
Excellent. Are the adapters included in the service?
Yes, they are. So as you guys probably know, with Flexera, they have what they call their Tier 1 adapters, which are the integrations that have been basically productized. So they really are kind of plug and play in that sense. So we're including the Tier 1 adapters as part of SAMSimple.
And he also says, and what is the cost per desktop, and is there minimum subscription length?
Yep. So great question. So when it comes to the costs of SAMSimple, let me answer the question a little bit more broadly, if I may. There are two elements to the cost. So the first element is the onboarding cost, and that is a one-off onboarding fee. And the amount of that is based on the number of devices that the customer has, and also a measure of complexity of that customer's environment. And we're not trying to really go into huge amounts of detail on the scoping. The idea behind the onboarding is just to cover our costs in terms of getting that technology deployed, getting the entitlement gathered before the customer transitions into BAU. So that one-off onboarding fee is calculated based on the number of devices and a measure of the complexity. And we simply classify the customers being, easy, medium, or complex in terms of their complexity based on considerations like the network topology, number of Active Directory domains, if they're trusted, if they're not, and so on. So most customers in the size bracket that we're talking to for SAMSimple, typically fall into, either the easy or the medium. So that one-off implementation cost is relatively low. When the customer transitions into BAU, then the BAU payments are on a per device per month basis, but they're billed quarterly. So what we actually do during onboarding is take a count of the number of devices in that customer's organization. So let's, for argument's sake, let's say that we do that with a customer and we find there are 2,000 devices when we onboard them. So the customer would pay for 2,000 devices for Q1. So in the first quarter, they pay for 2,000 devices based on the per device per month charge. What we then do in Q1 is we also take account of the actual number of devices in Q1. That then becomes the number they pay for in Q2. So in my example, let's say the customer in Q1 adds 5 devices to their organization, so the Q1 count is 2005. That means they'll pay for 2005 in Q2. In Q2, let's say the number jumps to 2010, then they'll pay for 2010 in Q3. Now, if the number then drops back down to 2005 in Q4, they'll pay for 2005 in Q4. And that's really how that works. Now, when it comes to what is that per device per month cost, well, SAMSimple is a global solution. So we're obviously pricing it in different markets. So there isn't a one cost fits all approach to this. But what I would say is that in terms of order of magnitude, for the cost of a cup of coffee per device per month, that's what SAMSimple customers can expect to be paying. But obviously, if you want to have a specific quote for your environment, we recommend you reach out to your local SoftwareONE representative. And of course, we'll be happy to talk to you on that basis.
Great. And then going along with that, someone else asked, what are considered devices like PCs or servers?
Yep, great question. Yeah, so quite right. We classify devices as being servers, as being desktop devices, workstations, laptops, virtual machines, physical servers as well. So it's really anything that inventory information can be gathered on that will count towards a compliance calculation. That's the definition of a device.
All right. What about terminal devices?
So terminal devices, so things like VDI, for example, if the VDIs are persistent, then yes. If they're non-persistent, then no.
Okay. Can the categorized software data be repurposed for use in our other services, like the service desk?
Absolutely, yes. So, customers have full access to that technology. So, they have the capability to pull the information out. The inventory is gathered not just for the in-scope publishers. When we collect inventory, we scan all the devices and we pull all of the software from those devices, and that goes through Flexera's application recognition library. So the inventory is very comprehensive that's in the technology. Customers have full access to that technology. They can report against it. They can pull information out for any other reason they need to.
Okay. We have a little bit of an earlier question. Does Adobe include Creative Cloud? If so, how does that work?
So the answer is yes, it does include Creative Cloud, and it works exactly the same as it works for all the other publishers, in the sense that we will gather the inventory information we will gather the entitlement information, and that publisher will be onboarded in the same way Microsoft would be, in the same way VMware would be.
All right. How does previous purchase data, let's say Microsoft, get injected?
So I like the term injected, by the way. That's a great terminology. But basically, again, it's the same approach for all publishers in terms of our entitlement gathering. So let's take Microsoft as an example. When we ask customers to sign up to SAMSimple, we also ask them to provide us with a letter of authorization to basically go and talk to the publisher. So if it's Microsoft, we can basically go and request that information from Microsoft using that letter of authorization. Now, in some circumstances, again, it depends on the publisher. We might not want to go and talk to certain publishers for the risk of it perhaps triggering some activity, let's say. So in those scenarios, we can talk to the reseller. Now, if SoftwareONE is the reseller, that's relatively straightforward. If SoftwareONE is not the reseller, then of course we can use the same letter of authority to go and talk to the approved reseller for that technology. And then finally, if none of those avenues are appropriate, then what we'll do is work with the customer's own information, so the customer's contract information, the customer's purchase history. Now, what we do when we've gathered that information through those means is we'll basically put it into templates that are uploadable directly into Flexera. So Flexera provides a data interface library, effectively. We'll use those templates to populate that information for the contracts and licenses that that customer has. But I'm going with the term inject rather than integrate because I prefer it.
Excellent. He follows that one up with SQL Server and other software has usage rights where they can be exempt, like MSDN or testing. How does that happen in SAMSimple?
Yeah, so again, that's back to Flexera's capability. So Flexera have an extensive product use rights library for Microsoft, amongst others, and as well as the capability to deal with things like upgrade rights, downgrade rights, rights of second use, roaming use rights, and so on. It also has the capability to deal with exemptions. So be that exemptions through things like where they're non-production and they're covered by MSDN, or indeed exemptions where, for example, it could be a passive node in a SQL Server environment and that customer owns software assurance on those SQL Server licenses. So to answer, the answer is yes, the technology can absolutely cope with those exemptions for various different reasons. What we would do as SoftwareONE is work with the customer to understand that environment and make sure those exemptions are applied so that those devices aren't consuming licenses where they shouldn't be.
All right. Have you had to deal with the works councils in EMEA, and has this been blessed for deployment with other customers?
That's a very good question. So it absolutely has been blessed with use by other companies. When we talk about works councils, I'm not sure if the question's more focused on data protection, I'm wondering. Perhaps if whoever asked that question can maybe give me a little bit more amplification on that. But as I already mentioned at the start, okay, great, thank you. So yeah, so we're hosting SAMSimple in the public cloud, as I mentioned. We're actually hosting it in Azure, and it's hosted in the West European data center on day one. So that's where our Azure instance for SAMSimple is. However, in the future, as demand grows, of course, we will establish other SAMSimple instances in other regions. Now, really today, and I guess the question from a Works Council perspective is a European one, Europe certainly has the kind of stricter rules in terms of data protection. That's why we put the first instance in Europe. So most of those concerns for European customers, I think, will be addressed with the fact that we're running it in European data centers. However, as I mentioned, our plan is to scale out and introduce more SAMSimple instances across the globe, as demand grows.
All right. Can data sovereignty be observed today? We need data to be in the USA. When will it be available?
So I don't have so it's really a follow-on question from what I've just mentioned. So the answer there is yes, we will be spinning up a US instance of SAMSimple in the very near future. I don't have a date to give you right now, but it is something that's on the short-term roadmap for SAMSimple. So my advice there is watch this space, and if you'd like to reach out to your SoftwareONE representative, we'll make sure we let you know as soon as we have a date we can share with you.
Awesome. And then we have another question. Is there a trial or demo available or a web page where we can see more of SAMSimple?
Yes, so yes, there is. We're happy to provide demos. We've done so. You know, we launched SAMSimple a couple of months ago now in the summer, and I've personally actually provided, I'd say, 20 or so demos so far for customers. We're very, very happy to do that. Again, if you'd like to see a demo, please reach out to your local SoftwareONE account management team. We're collecting everybody's email addresses who are attending this webinar. So if you don't have an account manager today, you'll receive an email from us with a feedback survey and where to get the recording. Please respond to that email. We'll happily contact you to arrange a demo if you want to see further information. We're also working, and it's very close to being finished now, on a recording, of a demo, a quick video that really gives a high-level overview of that technology. We'll be making that available on the SoftwareONE website in the very short term. But the answer is yes, we'll happily provide demos for customers if they want to see more detail.
Awesome. And then he would like further clarification on the price of a cup of coffee, because he says it can range from $1 to $8.
That's a very fair point, and it depends where in the world you are, to be perfectly honest. But I think that's a very good. Obviously, I'm not going to give quite a broad range like that. But I would say, reach out to SoftwareONE. We'll happily have that conversation with you one-to-one. But to answer your question, it's closer to the bottom end of that range you just gave, and certainly not at the top end.
All right. That's all the questions I do see, and we're running close to the hour here, so we can wrap her up.
Okay, perfect. Well, look, guys, thank you very much for your time and attention this afternoon or this evening, depending on where in the world you're joining us from. Huge thanks to Kevin Hooton. Kevin's a very busy guy doing great work, so we're very lucky to have an hour of his time, certainly. And yeah, closing comments from me. Again, thank you for your time and attention, and by all means, follow up if you'd like more information.
Great. Thank you, everyone, for your time today.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks. Bye.
Perfect. Take care.